So I keep having this thought about the Big Ten and the SEC, and I think about, that famous banking line. Classic, right?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, realignment, coaching, carousel, the portal, and so much more. Always got you covered. This episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stops sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lots to get to on today's show. Got some audio from Sherrone Moore, Michigan head coach, that will play. Lars Hanson, co-host of Locked On Huskies. We'll talk about what Jedd Fisch said here at Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis, which are literally wrapping up as I am recording this show. Doesn't make the time necessarily go faster, but if you sense the urgency in my voice, it's because I don't want someone to come over and kick me out. But I'm thinking about the Big Ten. I'm thinking about the SEC. Kyle Whittingham recently said that there are going to be two super conferences one day. And I thought about that in the context of whether or not you could see conferences just continue to get picked off and whether you would actually have two super leagues one day. And the notion of too big to fail is one that has been applied to banks in the United States and globally many a times. And I think the SEC and the Big Ten, because of their expansion, have ensured that they are in fact too big to fail. Can I envision a college football world, that does not have an ACC and does not have a Big 12 and just has the Big Ten and the SEC? I think you absolutely can. I think that is a realistic possibility. And I was thinking about this throughout the week as Big Ten Media Days aired, and you looked at just the strength of the Big Ten Conference. And I saw the same thing last week in Dallas with SEC Media Days. And the way that, you just keep seeing these teams come up and you go, wait, so it's this conference, which we already knew was really good, and they've got these teams now? And yeah, you think about it, you go, oh yeah, no, they're over there. But then you think about what that means. What does it mean for the Big Ten to have Oregon and Washington and USC, UCLA also in the mix? I have not been particularly high on the Bruins' hire of Deshaun Foster. He has not coached a game yet. Why don't we reserve judgment until then? So far I'm right, but that's a different argument here. But you have three programs there. One that should be a recruiting power in Los Angeles and a power in college football nationally when all is going according to plan, and they have a head coach who won 10 or more games every year until this past season when coaching a full season in college football. And then you have Oregon, who are recruiting perennially at a top 5 level right now, made a playoff appearance, and have been in the Pac-12 championship game two of the last 3 seasons, and they are one of the favorites to go into the Big Ten championship game. And then you have Washington, which is going to have a reset year, or what Jedd Fisch called a true rebuild season in 2024. But what does it look like when Washington's right? Oh, that's right, they were in the national championship game this past season. If you make the right hires at any of those places, you're adding 3 national championship caliber programs to a league that just won a national championship, that had been in the playoff every single year. I don't know if there's a year where both Ohio State and Michigan missed the playoffs. Somebody can fact check me on that if you would like. But Ohio State and Michigan, every year when they met in the regular season, always feels like the winner is going to the playoff. And I can't see those programs regularly missing the playoff. I think Michigan has a difficult schedule and a lot of questions to answer going into this year. But still, the fundamental fact remains that these leagues are now so incredibly strong and deep with conference championship and national championship caliber programs that I don't see them ever going away. Does the Big 12 have that sort of long-term viability? They have stability for now compared to the ACC because we're waiting to hear what's going to happen with Florida State and Clemson. And the ACC, of course it has no long-term stability. I mean, no one actually knows for sure, 100%. We have suspicions, we have guesses, we have estimations about what's going to take place. But no one knows for sure how the ACC is going to navigate the future. But even if you're talking about, what Kyle Whittingham mentioned, which is just these 2 super conferences, it's going to be the Big Ten and the SEC and everybody that's in it now. If they were to break away from the NCAA and chart their own path forward, would they bring along some of the bottom dwellers? Would Indiana go with the Big Ten? Would Vanderbilt go with the SEC? Would Illinois get invited? Would Mississippi State be brought along for the ride? Gosh, I hope so, because I don't think leaving anybody behind is really good for the sport. But I do think that possibility will continue to grow in the coming years, that you'll see these conferences and how strong they are, and they'll just want more, because that's all they've ever wanted. That's all they've ever wanted is more. Did the SEC need Texas and Oklahoma? Absolutely not. They didn't need it to recruit the state of Texas. They didn't need it to have a presence in the state of Texas. They didn't need it to have a national championship caliber program. That was not something the SEC needed, but they did it. Did the Big Ten need USC, UCLA? No, absolutely not. I mean, they don't need UCLA for anything, except the television market that they're bringing to the table. Was the Big Ten struggling with viewership? Were they lacking funds? Were they lacking attention, respect, credibility in the college football space? Last time I checked, the answer to that question also a no, because they won the national championship before those teams got in. So it's not like you're adding teams and suddenly you have credibility you didn't have before. You're just adding to it. You're just building upon what you have. So the strength of these leagues is so crazy. I think it's even greater than normal people might even realize. More casual college football fans, you could say, might realize, because what happens if Jonathan Smith builds Michigan State into what they're capable of being? Remember, Michigan State made the 4-team playoff once upon a time. So can they make a 12-team playoff? Yes, they can. Jonathan Smith, very good football coach. What if he gets that rolling? What if Matt Rule has the same sort of success at Nebraska as he had at Baylor or at Temple when he was last a college football coach? What happens then? What does the Big Ten look like? The outlook of these conferences is just so very strong. The idea of consolidation is just never going to be off the table, because I think once you get it reminds me a little bit of golf. I've played golf for a very long time. I'm a huge golfer. I'm sure many of you are out there as well. You work really hard to get better and be the best you can be. And once you have made substantial improvements and you're at a level that you've always wanted to be at, your desire to improve doesn't go away. It just remains. You just want to go to the next level. Yeah, the Big Ten wanted to be a coast-to-coast conference. Now they've accomplished that, right? They're in Piscataway, they're in Seattle, in the same conference, which is really, really weird, but that is the reality here in 2024. So once they get to that level, you think they'll be content. Same thing with playoff expansion. We haven't even had a 12-team playoff yet. You've already heard discussions or considerations about a 14-team playoff. It's always more. It's always more. I see no end in sight, because these leagues have got so many great schools and so many great programs. They're going to see the strength of it. And then one of them, I think, will eventually add Florida State and Clemson. And we'll see if Notre Dame truly remains an independent. They would, of course, be a school that anybody would want. And I think they would pretty publicly say that they want even more so. But I don't know. Those are my Friday thoughts here from Indianapolis at Big Ten Media Days. Sherrone Moore had plenty of thoughts as well, Michigan head coach. How did they compete for a playoff spot with a schedule that is a lot tougher than you might think? Plus, he spoke about the quarterback situation. That's coming up next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors, they've got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So the Big Ten had their preseason honorees, and Michigan had 3 of the 12. Ohio State had 4. Oregon had 2, and there were a handful of other players on the list as well. It's kind of a strange list. There's just 12 players, not a full offense, not a full defense, no offensive linemen in there. I don't know. Anyway, Michigan had 3 of those players. And for all the talk about how many players they lost to the NFL, there are a lot of really, really high-end guys that are going to be playing for the Wolverines this year. How many are on offense? Well, Donovan Edwards certainly is one of them. We'll hear a quote from him later in this particular segment. But I think an underrated element about the challenge for Michigan to get back to the playoff this season is they have a difficult schedule, because we're not talking about a Big Ten championship just with their Big Ten schedule. Or I should phrase that a little bit better. When you talk about a playoff, you're not talking about just winning a Big Ten championship. You're also looking at having a quality non-conference win. Well, week 2, they host Texas, which is a great change of pace for Michigan, because the UCLA home-and-home series got canceled. I think that was a bummer for college football fans and for fans of both programs, and they were playing nobody schools instead. Like, I don't think that was good for anyone. But now they're up in the ante, and they're going from we're playing Bowling Green to we're playing Texas. Oh boy. So they have to play Texas. They also have to play USC at home. I don't know if bullish is the right word on USC. I definitely think they're an 8-win team minimum in 2024 because they have made significant defensive improvements. So you've got Texas at home, you've got USC at home, you've got Oregon at home, you have to go at Ohio State. How many of those games do you think Michigan can lose and make the playoff? Sherrone Moore was asked about the scheduling component, and he said what you'd expect most coaches to say.
I don't know. I think you want to have the competitive nature regardless of what you do. And a lot of these schedules are scheduled out a while from now. So for us, we're just going to play whoever we have to play.
Boy, I love that he mentioned the insanity, the craziness, the ridiculousness of college football scheduling. It is absurd. So Michigan's got to avoid a stumble against a team that, when you look at their schedule, you'd say, oh, there's no way they lose that particular game. So that's standard number one. I think they're incredibly capable of that, regardless of the quarterback play, which I'll get to here in just a sec. But all 4 of those games, 3 of them being at home, that's a benefit to Michigan, 100%. Because Sherrone Moore talked about not being content, and that, at a place like Michigan, you don't have a grace period. You don't have, a benefit of the doubt sort of year of like, oh, you just won a national championship. Who cares what happens this year? No, he seemed very, very serious when talking to the media earlier today that is not the way that he views the situation, not what he expects the fans to demand of him and his program. I tend to agree with that particular suggestion, but this schedule is pretty sneaky tough, because they are going to be underdogs at home against Oregon. They're going to be underdogs at home against Texas. They are favored against USC, and they're going to be underdogs on the road against Ohio State. Now, does that mean everything? Is that the be-all, end-all? No, underdogs win in college football all the time. And one thing that I noticed last year in particular, looking at betting lines and teams that ended up winning, a bigger line isn't saying the same thing about a matchup in college as it does in the NFL. So if there is a point spread that is between 8 to 10 points in the NFL, there is an incredibly low chance that underdog wins the game outright. It's a low chance in college football, but it's not as low. It's not exactly the same. Like an 8 to 10 point spread feels more like a 5 to 6 point spread in the NFL. So could USC go into Ann Arbor, beat Michigan? Yeah, I think that is entirely possible. Am I predicting it? No, I'm just saying it's possible. That's it. I'll see how many of you get upset at that particular notion. But that element of the schedule, very, very tough. Those 3 home games at Ohio State, which I think is going to be a loss, that's going to be challenging because you have to be 10-2. Paul Feinbaum, for all the hot takes he's had, he said something smart recently on ESPN when talking about Michigan and whether it's a reset year, that 9-3, you're holding your breath on Selection Sunday for the at-large teams that get into the college football playoff. I think he's right that you're holding your breath. I think you would go into that with a 70% expectation you're not going to get in, because you are going to have the 4 auto bids. You're going to have the group of 5 team. Okay, so now we have 7 spots left for the at-large. I think you're going to have the conference title game losers from the Big Ten or the SEC rather. So that's 7 spots that are gone. I think you'll have one other SEC team that finishes at 10-2. Okay, that's another spot gone. Now you're down to 4 spots. And look, could a 9-3 Michigan be in there? Sure. If they've got a win over Texas and a loss to, Oregon, Ohio State, and USC, for instance, but they beat everybody else and they look good doing it, yeah, that's entirely possible. One question I have for Michigan, though, and all the fans out there, I know some of you don't like me, and that's fine. I don't have a personal vendetta against Michigan, contrary to what you might think. But the question I have is, when you have this level of a quarterback debate going into fall camp, can you expect to be a playoff team? Should you expect to be a playoff team? That's a difficult proposition when you lost 18 players to the NFL draft. And yes, there are several talented individuals, but to pretend that this year's Michigan team would beat or be close to, frankly, last year's Michigan team, like if you put on the field 2023 Michigan against 2024 Michigan, who's winning that football game? I got my money on 2023 every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But I think Alex Orji is really intriguing. He's not the only quarterback option available, but when you watch him throw, you go, got a little zip. We know he can move. Maybe he makes the running game just as dynamic as it was last year with J.J. McCarthy. That probably comes down to the offensive line. But Sherrone Moore spoke about the quarterbacks. Here's what he had to say.
And like I said earlier, I think the number one thing is who's going to take care of the football. Who's going to be the guy to take care of the football. Our defense is going to provide them a bunch of different looks. They're going to have Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant running at them, Josiah Stewart and Jay Sean Barham and Will off the edge and Makari and all these guys and the different looks. So who's going to take care of the football? Who's going to make a play? And then next thing, who's going to really lean on the team win and team first mentality? And for us, we'll get a good feel as we go through training camp. Don't know what the day is, don't know when it'll be, but you guys will know as soon as we do.
It's a good reminder. You don't need to come in and go for 300 yards a game. This is not an air raid. It is quite the opposite of an air raid. Can you play complementary football? That's one of the reasons that my confidence in Michigan's ability to, have a less severe drop-off than Washington is pretty high, because their system is more translatable because it's not quarterback dependent. You just need your quarterback to be fine, capable, good, decent, solid, and I think they can do that. And speaking of Michigan's schedule, we'll close with this note. There's a national championship game rematch in October. I think Michigan should feel really confident because it's a terrible matchup for Washington going into the game. Donovan Edwards was asked about his performance in the national championship game and what it means for going into Seattle this year. I think it's a game Michigan wins. I don't know if they're rolling by 20 to 25 points as they did a year ago, 34-13 final score of the national championship game. I don't think it's that sort of score. I think Michigan wins. But could it make them uncomfortable? Yeah, it absolutely could in Seattle.
Yeah, it always was a growing process, but yes, that's my guy, and I love and I respect him.
Donovan, how much do you feel your performance in the national championship game against Washington gave you a running start for this season? And looking forward to that matchup in Seattle, is there anything different about this season, knowing that it's a Big Ten game?
The way that I look at this is loud. Is this loud? Too loud for y'all? Just a tad bit, right? Hell yeah, my bad. The way that I look at that national championship game, I was just going through a lot mentally and emotionally. It was a roller coaster for me. I'm not afraid to talk about that. And I was reading the book of Job because I'm reading the Bible from front to back. So I was in the book of Job at that time. And if you don't know about that story, everything was taken from Job. He had everything, thousands of cattle, a whole family, beautiful family, and everything was taken from him. And ultimately, God blessed him. He multiplied his blessings, and I think that's what happened with me after that during that national championship game, because I stayed patient, I stayed humbled, and I didn't, curse anybody out. I didn't, go against my beliefs or anything like that. I stayed humble in God's eyes. So, ultimately, I think that He's blessed me and multiplied my blessings, and I'm going to continue to do everything that I can to, uphold that righteousness and, be a humble young man.
And then with that Washington game, is there any special relevance to that, knowing it's going to be a Big Ten game versus last year was the national championship? There's kind of two different respects in that game.
Yeah, I'm sure that, just like every other game, Washington's going to give their best to us, and we're going to give Washington our best. So, it's going to be great, especially traveling to Washington. Yeah, when they travel here in 2021, it's going to be a very fun game.
Donovan, do you think you're a different person?
Should be a fun year. Hope you enjoyed the audio clips. Do you know that Washington's a Big Ten team? I mean, I've said it several times on today's show. That national championship rematch isn't a non-conference bout like Michigan and Texas. It's a conference game. And setting reasonable expectations for Jedd Fisch and the Huskies this year, well, that's an important thing to do, and we're going to do that next. Today's episode is brought to you by friends at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to because we just get fewer games, which it's going to pick up eventually, but it's not right now. But the good news is FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. They have everything you could possibly imagine for college football over there. They have got individual games. They have got conference championship odds, national championship odds, over-under win totals. It's all over there at FanDuel. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel.com, FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Jedd Fisch is a Big Ten football coach. Welcome to 2024. That is Lars Hanson, co-host Locked On Huskies, joining me here on the show. Lars, we'll hit a couple of points, but first, your initial reaction to what Jedd Fisch said. The most kind of quotable moment was when he pointed out that Washington has beaten Oregon 3 times in a row, Texas 2 times in a row, and whatnot. Of course, he hasn't coached a game at Washington yet, but that's his university. That's accomplished all that.
Yeah, and he omitted the fact that he lost to Washington last year at Arizona, his former school. So the fact that Jedd is a salesman. That's the one thing I've learned about Jedd in his time at Washington. Jedd has no fear setting lofty expectations, whether they're even realistic or in the ballpark are realistic. He set the expectation for having the highest ranked recruiting class in Washington history for 2025. Whether they meet that or not, the idea that year one he's going to have that much success was a little bit lofty. So hearing Jedd's comments at the podium wasn't necessarily that much of a surprise in hindsight for someone who covers Washington, but it also is a little weird just in this whole Jedd Fisch is a Washington Big Ten head football coach. And also, weirdly enough, Washington did beat Oregon 3 years in a row and Texas twice in 2 bowl games. Worth noting, it's in 2 bowl games, not 2 regular season games. I have a hunch that game would have gone differently if it was in the regular season or in Austin. Just something different. There was a little bit of momentum going in UW's favor in both of those games. Obviously, the Sugar Bowl getting to the national championship game. But Jedd's got a lot of work to do because he, as he said in that opening remark, 46 new players. A brand new roster, a brand new coaching staff. The only coach that has any familiarity with us 2. Jimmy Doherty, the quarterback's coach, and tight ends coach Jordan Pauper, and also the special teams coordinator. Both coaches were at Washington with Steve Sarkisian back in 2012, 2013. Long time ago. The school has changed. It's a new conference. It's a new day. But Jedd is still the same old Jedd.
Yeah, and I think that for Washington this year, any coach and on the lofty expectations front, recruiting trail, whatever you want to talk about, I think it's fair for fans to say, have your reaction like, I don't know. But would you rather a coach strive for that or say he's going to strive for that and not actually have the ability to reach it? Or would you rather have someone come out and said, we just kind of accept where we're like, that's going to drive people, into a frenzy there. So I understand where he's coming from with all of that. But for this particular season, 46 new players, that's a Colorado level of turnover. Like that's an entirely new roster. 20 or 21 of the starters from last year's team gone to the NFL or the transfer portal. So where do you see Washington fitting into the conference they are now officially a new member of? I mean, the logos are formally up around here in Indianapolis. There's Michigan's logo over there, and then not far down the way, there's Washington, there's Oregon, there's USC and UCLA. Where does Washington for 2024 fit into that mix?
Washington fans are not going to like to hear this, but where the Big Ten unofficial preseason media polls had them between 9 and 10, basically in the dead middle of this 18-team Big Ten conference, which again, Big Ten, 18 teams, still all weird to say. But that's where Washington's at. They're not UCLA, bottom third. They're not struggling that much because I do think there's enough talent on the roster with Will Rogers, a 5th-year, 6th-year quarterback coming from Mississippi State, Jonah Coleman. There's enough pieces. And then you also bring in Steve Belichick as this defensive coordinator from the New England Patriots. So there's enough pieces to not be totally awful, but by no means is this a 9-10 win team going to the college football playoff, even in an expanded college football playoff. So I think having their expectation be the middle of the conference, I have them finishing 7-5, 8-4, depending on which certain games. And the key games are not in November. I'm already saying they're losing to Oregon. I'm already saying they can lose to Penn State. Those are already guaranteed losses on the schedule. If they happen to win those games, so be it.
And they go to Penn State,
and they go
right?
to Penn State, and they go to
country.
Eugene,
yep.
and Those are all in the month of November. Those games against Rutgers on Friday night at the end of September and Iowa City on October 12th, I know those, when you hear those two schools, are like, who cares about Iowa and Rutgers? But those are now the new tough games of the conference. Those are the Oregon State games. Those are the Cal games, which Washington did struggle with in the latter years of the Pac-12, going down to the Bay Area, sneaking some away, and even actually losing to Cal in 2019, the Lightning year.
The Lightning
year. I don't even know what year that was.
I think it was 2019.
It was 2019 because it was Chris
2019.
Peterson's last year.
Yep.
Chris Peterson came on the microphone at 1:30 in the morning saying, "We're getting ready to play," and I'm like, "There's 10 people in the stands. This is awesome." And I got home at 3 in the morning, so there's a lot that has changed in that regard. But these are new challenges for Washington. Going across the country to New Jersey, they did that before, but that was for home and home back in 2015, 24, over a decade ago. Clearly over a decade ago in that regard. And Rutgers has gotten better. Greg Schiano's there, so these are all different tough outs. There's no way that you can say Washington is on the same level of Oregon this year. There's an unbiased look at both rosters would say, yeah, there's Washington that has talent, but Oregon is a couple yards, maybe a couple first downs.
And I think the biggest difference between those two teams specifically, the returners. Yeah. Like Washington's got a lot of talented newcomers, but Oregon has matched or even surpassed that in the transfer portal. If you look at the 24/7 rankings, that's the way you'd see it. You can say that's not the best way to look at it, fine, but Oregon's brought in some heavy hitters in the transfer portal, and they have a core of returners, guys that have all-conference capability or NFL draft capability as well. But I'm glad you brought up Will Rogers, because I think when you talk about the landscape of quarterbacks in the Big Ten, I think this is the weakest the weakest quarterback conference in the Power Four. I think the Big 12 is probably the best, or the SEC. Those are the top two. I think the ACC is squarely in third. I think the Big Ten is clearly fourth. That said, Will Rogers is not at the bottom of that conference. He's not at the top either. He's right. Not there, but he's not a guy that is going to go out and struggle to throw for 200 yards in a game. This isn't Jeff Sims at Nebraska last year. Will Rogers is a quarterback that if you put Will Rogers on Michigan this year, I think that would answer a lot of questions.
Absolutely, and I think, the key factor for Washington is you can have, Will Rogers is a great quarterback, and I think he's going to win the job, and DeMond's going to be the starter in 25, and so on and so forth. But my question, Will's a good quarterback, but he has to have an offensive line, and I look at Washington's offensive line right now. It's a problem. You know what? It could turn out to be good. It's a boom or bust situation where you're bringing in a former JUCO All-American left tackle who hasn't played in 18 months, a starting left guard who had an ACL injury last season, a Portland State center, an Ohio State fifth-year right guard who only had 2 starts in his entire career in Columbus, and a decent starting right tackle at San Diego State, Drew Azzopardi, who started for 1 year. That, to me, Will Rogers, and I think that the reason why Will Rogers is so important, having that veteran presence at the quarterback position, setting up the offense, setting up the offensive line, helping kind of massage some of those kinks early on, might end up producing 1 or 2 extra wins that would not come with a different type of quarterback. The question is Will going to have enough time? I think it's a perfect marriage between him and Jedd, and you have to remember, he committed to Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb. That was who he wanted to play for, and by the time he ended up looking in the portal a second time around, he was going G5. That was the only other option he could. There wasn't a ton of other Power 4 options.
Everybody the quarterback carousel had kind of already played itself out.
Exactly, and so it was a perfect mix to end up with Jedd, an offensive coach. So there's no Jimmy Lake factor of I got a defensive head coach and I'm an offensive and I'm a quarterback, but there's still so many. It's the mystery team in college football. It is the flat. That's the only way that I can describe it. It's the mystery team in college football because, there's a lot of potential, but potential on paper can go up in flames pretty quick. At the end of September, if you're 3-3.
I think if the O line struggles, those Oregon and Michigan games could get ugly because those are premier defensive lines. And so I want to close with Michigan. You talked to Donovan Edwards earlier while he was here at Big Ten Media Days about the rematch with Washington. What did he say that was notable? And then your quick thoughts on that game that is a rematch of the national championship game, but certainly it's going to look and feel very different. You got new coaches, new players, you got new everything, and the game's being played in Seattle instead of a neutral site.
And a perfect segue into that, Donovan Edwards also mentioned the 21 game, again, when Washington traveled to Michigan under Jimmy Lake. and having that debacle, the way that game went down,
Right.
I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And this is why it's a perfect game to have in October, because you get the month of September to warm up, get everything figured out, and try and give Michigan your biggest punch, because they're going to get Washington's biggest punch. I just don't know how well it's going to connect when you look at the rush. Michigan does. You don't have J.J. McCarthy, but you do have Donovan Edwards. You have Will Johnson, who's a lockdown cornerback. So there's a lot of pieces that Michigan has.
Mason Graham, probably the best interior defensive lineman in this upcoming draft
I
class.
was already kind of just gifting that because of our talks with the offensive line. If Mason Graham doesn't have more than 3 sacks against Washington, I will be very surprised.
It'd be a win,
it would
morally, of course.
Exactly. But for me in this game of Washington, I don't expect them to win. I would say they're probably going to be 10-point underdogs coming into the game.
8.5, 9.5 is kind of where the line is. It opened 11.5, which I thought was a little bit too high. I think right around 8 or 9 is about right.
And so I can see the win for Washington is you lose by 4, or you lose on a field goal, or
Right.
you lose on a 1 possession. The key for Washington, do not have that second half result in the national championship game come up at home against Michigan again, because Washington disappeared in the second half, where there was so much fight that I was expecting in that national championship game that never came. And now you have some of those still guys, Cameron Ficciolani, Carson Bruner, Alfonso Tuputala, linebacker, a handful of guys that were a part of that 23 team that still have a little sour taste in their mouth from everything that went on. I have a hunch they're going to get up for that game. I don't expect them to win, but I don't think it's going to be a blowout unless, of course, as we said, the offensive line is just in absolute chaos, which is a separate result.
I think that's where the mismatch could come into play, is Michigan's D-line, Washington's offensive line. One thing I do know for sure, Michigan's going to get the best punch from that Seattle crowd. Like, you know that no matter what has happened in Washington's seasons up to that point, and they should have several wins on their resume at that point in the season, crowd should have that. I don't know if it'll be the Oregon gear from a season ago, but I think they'll certainly be cranked up to a 9 or 10 on the noise meter.
Nothing will top that Oregon game. I will tell you
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Watching that on the sideline, hearing the
that was
silence
different.
in the air as Camden Lewis his kick was in the air, nothing will ever top that.
Lars Hanson, co-host Locked On Huskies here at Big Ten Media Days, joining me in person. Lars, appreciate it, man.
Always, Spencer.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.